This is actually the kickoff event for the Great Writers, Great Reading series this semester, hosted by the Hofstra English Department and Cultural Center. My name is Kelly McMasters, and I'm a professor here in the undergraduate and MFA writing programs. I'm also the director of the Publishing Studies program. I'm standing in tonight for Professor Martha McPhee, who oversees this reading series, and we thank her in her absence. She's on sabbatical, so that is a very good thing, very good reason for not being here. And I'm honored to be here tonight with two writers, Sonya Chung and Lina María Ferreira Cabeza-Vanegas, celebrating a book that we all helped build called This Is the Place, Women Writing About Home. So we're going to start with a reading from each of the writers, and then we're going to move to a panel format where I get to ask them questions about their work and experience with this anthology and other writing life things. And then we'll open it up to questions from all of you at the end. So just hold those till the end if you'd like, and we'll have a microphone provided, and you can ask whatever you would like. I am both an editor and a writer for this book. My co-editor, Margot Kahn, is a West Coast writer, and we put this book together. It's 30 essays, all by women writing about the idea of home. So since I'm up here already, I'm going to start reading a little bit from the introduction that my co-editor and I put together for this book, and then I'll just read a short passage from my essay before inviting Sonia up to the podium. As women coming of age in the modern era, moving out of our parents' homes and into spaces of our own was exhilarating and terrifying. We looked to the past, to the homes of our mothers and grandmothers had defined for us by example, and we looked forward into something new we were going to create. Our wishes and daydreams were defining not only the kinds of spaces our homes would be, but the kinds of women, wives, partners, mothers, and citizens we could become. As we got older, moving out of homes where we thought we'd be forever, or feeling stuck in places we didn't mean to be for so long, we realized that home is a loaded word and a complex idea. It's a place that is safe, sentimental, difficult, nourishing, war-torn, and political. There are so many ways to define it. We might have an ancestral home or homeland, and the place we're living at the moment, and also the place where we feel our soul belongs. Home can be a place whose memory remains trapped in our bones, a notion that may be passed down in our very DNA. Home can be a place where we learn to first understand our place in the world, and a place we return to again and again for answers about how to be. Home is a place constantly evolving alongside our concepts of work, family, gender roles, the economy, and the environment. It is a concept worthy of ongoing reflection and renegotiation. In her essay on moving home, Kirsten Sundberg Lundström says, of the place she chooses to call home, I am more myself here than I could be anywhere else in the world. This may be the home feeling we seek, most distilled. And yet, as we collected the essays that ultimately make up this book, we realized the work we were reading overwhelmingly contained an electric current of complicated beauty and love, as well as unease, dissatisfaction, and displacement. These are the stories at the core of our sense of being and belonging, and they are not all happily ever after. Like the rooms within a house, the essays in this collection inhabit the inner space, the thoughts, memories, emotions, questions, and meditations with which we envision and embody the idea of home. In this regard, it is not surprising that these essays connect to so many of the issues now at the forefront of our conversations: immigration, gender equality, sexual and family violence, homelessness, and poverty. It is no accident that we open the collection standing in the kitchen with Kate Lebo's piece, Here. Imagining home, creating home, staying home, and leaving home, whether to go to work every day or leaving a household or homeland for good, are all political acts for women. We rejoice in this. It makes us powerful, and we hope you feel the same. As I said, I had the privilege to be both a co-editor on this project and then the very daunting task of putting my own piece of work in here after reading the incredible selections that came in from the other women. So my piece, just to give you a little bit of background, just going to read a short snippet, is about a beautiful, maybe the most beautiful place that I've ever seen, a little part of northeast Pennsylvania, rural northeast Pennsylvania, where I lived for a short time. And as many of these essays are about, it was the sense of belonging and not belonging that was the struggle in that beautiful place that then spit me out. So my essay is called The Leaving Season, and here's just a little section about it. When I lived in New York City, I'd never imagined myself as the kind of woman who, with a baby on her hip and a toddler by her side, would collect bouquets of pineapple weed, pressing out the plant's juices with the pads of my calloused fingertips to dot behind my ears and under my children's noses. There was a fierce pride when I thought of my life on our little hill, what we could withstand. When we'd straddled both worlds, the city and the country, I would exhale as we hurtled up our long driveway, ending the 3-hour trip. Our city exterior would be punctured, and my brain and body came alive, senses alert to the smells and rough feel of wild ramps and rhubarb, cupping a baby to my breast. I felt alive to the tips of my fingers and toes. But then, once that world became our only one, a familiar numbness set in, similar to the days before the farmhouse, when I would stare out my city apartment window, dreaming of coconuts or crisp hotel sheets or the sea. Where do you escape to when you've escaped full time to your escape? That's the trick of the dollhouse. You can never really live there. You store all your ideas and dreams of the perfect home inside it, make the figures go about their business with their tiny plastic dishes and lace curtains. But if you actually live there, if you could shrink down and fit inside, you'd still be inhabiting someone else's house, cracked open for all the world to see. You could never feel home. I could lace my arms into the deer's caped skin, but I could never inhabit its body. Thank you. So one of my great pleasures tonight will be to introduce our next writer, Sonya Chung. Sonya is the author of the novels The Loved Ones, a Kirkus Best Fiction of 2016 selection, and Long for This World. She's a staff writer for The Millions, and her essays, stories, and reviews have appeared in Three Penny Review, Tin House, BuzzFeed, and more. She's also the recipient of a Pushcart Prize nomination, the Bronx Council on the Arts Fellowship, and a MacDowell Colony Fellowship. She lives in New York City and teaches at Skidmore College. Welcome, Sonya.
Hello. Good to see you all. Thank you, Kelly. What a pleasure to be here. We spent earlier this afternoon with Kelly's class, these wonderful students over here, and they're learning about anthologies. And as a novelist, I'm sort of new to anthologies, and I'm quickly becoming converted to them and sort of an evangelist for them, because I don't write short fiction, but I do write short form essays, short nonfiction. So this experience of being in this anthology has just been so wonderful because of being able to come out and do this and meet with students, meet with the other writers in the who are in the anthology. It's just been this, novel writing is very solitary. So just the community, the experience has been wonderful. So it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for having me. My essay is called Size Matters. And it's not about what you think it's about. The anthology, of course, is about home. This essay is about living in a small home, in a small space, and finding home there. So I'm just going to read some excerpts from it. So if you'll put up up with me while I sort of flip through pages as elegantly as possible? Okay, size matters. Your average portable vacuum cleaner features a retractable cord that is 12 feet in length. Square 12, multiply by pi, and you get 452, roughly the square footage of the area that can be cleaned without having to move the plug to another outlet. This is also the ideal size of any dwelling that I might call home. It is, in fact, the size of the studio apartment in New York City that I do call home. It's taken me a long time to feel at home somewhere, but I do, finally. We acted out of necessity, limits and constraints. We might have chosen otherwise with more resources. We imagined we would trade up sooner than later. Now I think, how can we hold on to this place? I could grow old and die here. Now when I browse real estate for one-bedrooms in the Bronx or Queens, I think, that's too big. Which came first, the claim that size matters or the assurance that it doesn't? It occurs to me in any case that the expression is guilty of weak specification. The unaddressed question isn't whether size matters, but rather which size is preferable. So let's be clear, when we say size matters, what we're saying without saying it is bigger is better. And when we say size doesn't matter, we offer comfort in the face of insecurity. Don't worry, small is okay. I'm saying small is more than okay. Small is home. What is big? What is small? Small equals poor. Small equals cheap, chintzy, meal portions, gemstones. Small is not the same as thin, which is considered attractive in women when in conjunction with tall. Small equals weak, engines, hands. Small equals failure, a small audience, a small readership. Small equals ungenerous, petty, rigid, regressive, hearts and minds. A small business is an independent business, a sign of healthy entrepreneurialism in a thriving community. Small equals the underdog we root for, the runt, the little engine that could. Every parent wants a small classroom for their child. Small equals luxury, specialty, elite, small batch bourbon, beer, cigars, ice cream. Small equals nimble, permissible, advanced, pets, luggage, electronics. Small equals limited, constrained. We forget, or perhaps in the US, we underestimate, that while limitations and constraints can be damaging, they're just as often constructive. Better than okay, better than big. We've lived in our small apartment for now 8 years. One of us is 6'1", which isn't me. We had a big dog until 2 years ago. Now we live with 2 little dogs, 4 rubber trees, and several herb plants. We are not 20-somethings or even 30-somethings on an adventure. This is home. Perhaps I mention it too often. Why do I do that? Like name dropping. It's some kind of badge, a need to prove something. We like it. It works. We've figured it out. What is it? Some things we've figured out. No radio, not even news, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. We both work from home, by the way. Same, obviously, for TV. Music with no lyrics is okay. Music with non-English lyrics, opera, for example, is okay. A decent set of headphones is a good investment. No way this works if only one of you is a smoker. Schedule your business phone calls during lunchtime or at 5 or while walking the dogs. Your chargers are not my chargers. Togetherness does not always involve verbal communication. Even so, after a full day of not talking and not listening, cocktail hour is a beautiful thing. A sleep mask is a good gift from the person who reads late into the night to the person who is highly light sensitive. In 450 square feet, with thoughtful planning, it is possible to have a living area with a TV, a dining area, a sleeping area, a full-sized kitchen, sufficient closet and pantry space, bathroom with tub, and 2 home offices. An hour is as long as you can sit fully clothed in a bathtub after an argument. It's better to walk around the block in your pajamas or find a bench, even late at night, even in the cold. Whatever it is, when you're living with another person in 450 square feet, you can't fake it or avoid it. Our family of 5 lived in a 2-bedroom apartment when I was born, the third of 3 girls. We moved to a 3-bedroom ranch house when I was still an infant. My middle sister and I shared a room while my oldest sister had her own, and we all shared a second bathroom. I have only scant memories of those years or that house. Photographs indicate that we 3 girls were together most of the time, not infrequently dressed identically. Soon we moved again, for school districts, most likely. I was starting pre-K, my oldest sister 3rd grade. My father's medical practice was growing. The new house had 5 bedrooms on 3 floors, a living room, a den, a family room, a dining room, a kitchen, a laundry room. The dining room and living room were hardly used since my parents rarely entertained. By this time they had few friends because my father was increasingly not friendly. Both my parents came from poor families, my father's much more so. Country people, uneducated, he was one of 12 children, never had enough food to eat or shoes to wear. He's the one who wanted and needed a big house. Today he lives alone, still unfriendly, in 3,000 square feet. Memories from that house are abundant and too clear. The house was not big enough to shroud my father's chronic anger, self-loathing, and their effects. It was the perfect size, on the other hand, for isolation and loneliness. My oldest sister's room was at the end of a long hallway with its own bathroom and 2 large closets that she filled with clothes and shoes, of which she became intensely possessive. Both sisters became teenagers before I did and often kept their doors closed. One night not long ago, my middle sister and I spoke honestly for the first time about those years. She knew and saw things that I never knew or saw, ugly scenes and words exchanged, and vice versa. We drank wine and we cried, sad and regretful, and it helped, but it was also too little, too late. In college, I made friends with women whose fathers were awful. They were, and still are, very close with their siblings. I'm convinced it's because they shared bedrooms. That house was too big. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. And I should say Sonia's gorgeous novel, The Loved Ones, will be available for sale and for her signing in the back at the end of the evening, along with This Is the Place, and along with the book of our next person who is coming up. Lina María Ferreira Cabeza-Vanegas is the author of Don't Come Back, a collection of essays, short stories, and translations that navigate the Colombian civil conflict with a personal investigation into her own life, family, and mixed heritage. She is an assistant professor of creative nonfiction at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I am very proud to say that she's also a contributor, and she's going to read, I think, maybe even some new work along with something from this. So let's welcome her up here. Thank you.
That's awful. That's an awful sound. I'm so sorry. I know you came out for the essays. I know that's what the kids want these days. I know. But if you can just bear with me for a tiny second, I'm gonna take the smallest poetic detour. So some context for this. Less than 2 months ago, I was sitting in my grandmother's living room, right beneath the statue of a virgin. The time has worn down her face into smudges and shadows, and she's sort of balancing on a crescent moon like a broken scythe while digging her heel into the back of a snake's head, and the snake is sort of frozen into mid-scream forever. I'm sitting right beneath her when I hear from the radio, a voice from the kitchen. My mother keeps the radio on at all times, and I hear this sentence that I will later, a few weeks later, when I come back to the US, hear debated on NPR, and the debate will be whether it was shit house or shit hole. But when I hear it, it doesn't really matter, because the way it was translated was shit country. Países de mierda, that's what they said. And And I'm having trouble explaining how sad that made me. Like how incredibly sad that sentence is. Because it's not a new sentence. It's quite old. It just kind of gets said suddenly. You kind of hear it. And I felt like there were hot coals in the pit of my stomach, and I was afraid that I was going to chip my teeth and burn my lips, spitting sparks. I was so sad. I was so angry. And because I know what it's like growing up in a country that people tell you is shit. I know what it's like growing up thinking that that might be what you are. I remember asking my mother if I was bad, if we were bad. I said, are we bad? Or does that happen later? Are we born this way? Or does that happen later? Because that's what I had heard over and over and over again. And I kept thinking of the little girls on this side of the sentence and on that side of the sentence too. The ones hearing it and thinking, is that the thing we say? Or is that the thing we are? And how we're all already paying for a wall that may never be built. And I was so angry and sad and just heartbroken. And I started yelling at the ether because there was nothing to yell at. And my mother kept trying to calm me down. She worries about me. She worries because I'm short-fused. That's what she calls me little short fuse occasionally. And she just tried to calm me down over and over again. And she kept saying, calm down, what are you going to do? Like this throwaway sentence, like it doesn't, it's not meant to have any meaning. What are you going to do? Like, what could you say? She said, ¿Qué vas a hacer? ¿Qué vas a decir? And I just kept shouting for a while until I went hoarse. And I kept thinking, what am I going to do? What can I say? What can you say to an argument that is so obviously untrue, that is so blatantly false? Because the value of a human life is not equivalent to the GDP of their country, and that's obvious to me, and I believe that, and I believe I'm not alone. What are you going to say? What can you possibly say to that? So, I don't know what to say, and I didn't know what to say that day, but I did post a poem, because the internet was the other ether that I could yell at. And the next day I posted another poem from the area. While the radio kept talking about, well, by that logic, are we also, and is this other country, and is that country, and if that entire continent? Like, but what is the logic behind such an illogical thing? And then I posted another poem, and then I posted another poem from authors from these places. And then I started translating it, and I've been translating a poem a day from these places since then. Because I don't know what to say, but I do know what other people have said. And maybe you haven't met people from these places before. Maybe I'm the first Colombian you meet, maybe not, I have no idea. But in case you want to say something, in case you want to have it there, in case you want to have an argument to throw back when you have nothing else to say. I've been doing a lot of these readings, and I'm starting all of them by reading one of these poems, and I translated this a few days ago. It's called Boat Adrift by Enrique Noriega, who is from Guatemala. I was mistaken. I was mistaken about azures. I was mistaken about azure horizons. I was mistaken out of fear. I was mistaken about myself. It wasn't mine to be me. It wasn't mine to be me just yet. I was mistaken about direction. I was mistaken about vocation. I am not lucid until I am mistaken. I am not critical until I refuse myself. I do not possess the keys to the text. I was mistaken about the book. I was mistaken out of fear. It wasn't mine to be me. It wasn't mine to be me just yet. It wasn't mine to be me just yet in this writing. Oh, azure horizons of the line. I haven't gone beyond being a reader. I was mistaken about myself, about words, about the ocean of words, about myself, about the words, about a leak of words, of concepts, about a leak of concepts, of visions. I am a leak of visions, that's it. I only know this. Alternatives, uncertain alternatives, and chaos, and ocean, and an ocean of words. That's what I've been. Ocean of words, ocean, devotion, wicked devotion, that's what I've been. Boat adrift, uncertain vessel, boat adrift. That's what I've been. That's over. Thank you. His name is Enrique Noriega, and you can find his work out there in the world. So, having said that, having done that, thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to read an essay, and I don't think Kelly knows this, but when she contacted me, ridiculously, I should say, I was working on 2 essays at the same time, and this was the first one that I was going to send you, or it's an adapted version of that first one, but it was way too long, and Sarah told me you can't send them this. So I should only mention a couple of things. One, if you are particularly sensitive to violence, there is violence here. Just be aware of that. It's not real violence. It's pretend violence. But be aware of that. And 2, a granadilla is a fruit, so I'm not cracking open an animal and eating its entrails just because some people have asked. That's all you need to know. Okay, here we go. This is called The Man Walks In and Removes His Hat. You know, Jeanette says, I saw the devil once. Jeanette is my grandmother's nurse, and she says this as she wipes my grandmother's chin with a napkin. I'm sitting across from them, at the kitchen table in my grandmother's Bogota apartment, right where I would sit after birthdays and Sunday dinners listening to my grandmother tell me about all the ghosts that used to haunt her, and every demon that would, she promised me, devour me someday. I pause. Do you mean the actual devil? My grandmother doesn't tell me stories anymore, doesn't speak to me, doesn't speak to anyone but Jeanette. Oh, but when we are alone, you should see it, Lina, how she goes on, and isn't that true, Doña Josefina? I've never seen it, and I doubt I ever will. It is difficult to picture this silent woman alone in a room with Jeanette, lively, friendly, arms waving, head thrown back, carcajadas, risas y sonrisas. I struggle to remember my grandmother laughing at all as I stare at her, slumped in a chair with a spine like a melting candle and eyes that skip shallowly over every object in view like pebbles across a black lake. Inside joke moment. You don't need to worry about that. Oh, how she tells me stories, don't you, Doña Josefina? The very one, Jeanette says. I saw the devil. While she feeds my grandmother beige slop and the metal spoon makes a plastic thud when it crashes against her dentures, el mismísimo diablo. My grandmother opens and closes her mouth like a bird in an abandoned nest. Really? I straighten my back and lean in close. My grandmother's maid, Kelly, emerges from the kitchen, beating something into a plastic bowl. You know, the devil used to appear a lot more often, before. Jeanette nods. Oh yeah, back when? Real often. Both Kelly and Jeanette are from a more rural and tropical part in Colombia, Mompox and Chiriguaná respectively, and it goes without saying that I stand at a great disadvantage in most things magical, being from the temperate weather Andean capital. I don't know what it is like being from places where the heat rises from the earth and descends from the sky and crushes everything in between, and the devil still bothers to show up every so often. At least, Kelly says, he used to, like when I tap a granadilla on the table, cracking its thin skull orange shell. Like, Jeanette feeds my grandmother another spoonful. Few years back, my mom's friend's friend, she saw him. Wait, what? I expected centuries, many decades at least, but Jeanette barely acknowledges my confusion and carries on with her story. My mother's friend's friend, she saw him and he told her what had happened. Jeanette turned for a moment to remind my grandmother to swallow. Ahí, mamá, traga, traga, sí. He was a nightmare, this terrible, terrible boy. Like, how terrible? I ask while Kelly lingers in the doorframe, beating and nodding. Like she's seen the devil too. This boy, he used to throw these tantrums and yell, this terrible boy, yell terrible things. He hit his own mother even. My grandmother hangs on Jeanette's every word, though I doubt she can understand much of it anymore. But his mother, she was good, forgiving, a saint. So one day, Jeanette takes a breath. She brings out his dinner, like always. A humble meal, and she sets it down before him and right there in front of him. Uh-huh, I say, peeling the orange shell from around the white, felt inner skin. And you know what he does? Jeanette swallows saliva and opens her mouth to remind my grandmother how it's done. This boy, he picks up the plate and he throws it. He didn't, I say. Did he? I imagine myself as a child throwing a plate at my formidable Colombian mother, and I remember the swing, snap, and sting of her leather shoe striking my skin. The gall, I say. Yes, Jeanette agrees. He was a terrible boy. Smashed it all to bits against the wall. No. Yes. Then what? Well, then comes a knock at the door. Right away? Right away. Do they answer? No. No? No. Jeanette raises her eyebrows and turns her head. not they. He, the boy, opens the door. Oh, I say, I see. Kelly is frying sweet plantains for lunch, but manages to emerge just at the right moments to punctuate the story with a nod or a sigh, as if to say, yeah, that sounds right, that's the devil. Wait, I say, pulling out a pen and a few napkins from the dispenser and start writing it all down. A tall man. In a suit, Jeanette states. A tall man in a suit, with fangs and horns and skin like melting wax. No, Jeanette says. No, just a suit. And he's handsome and dark-skinned, too. I look at Jeanette skeptically. Are you sure? I'm looking at her dark, freckled complexion and wonder if she's not just making devils in her own image. She raises an eyebrow. Yes, also he's handsome. Did you already write that part down? The terrible boy opens his mouth. The terrible boy opens the door and finds a man in a suit. He's dark-skinned and handsome. The man does not wait to be invited in, however. He simply walks in and removes his hat. No, Lena, Jeanette scoffs. Are you crazy? The devil doesn't wear a hat. I scratch out the sentence and start again. He walks in and wipes his forehead with a white handkerchief. Yes, Jeanette agrees. It is very hot. The handkerchief would make sense. The man, who is handsome but does not wear a hat, approaches the boy and surveys the damage. Lentils and rice dripping down onto the floor from the wall, and shattered porcelain all over. He takes a deep breath and says, Boy, please open your mouth. And the terrible boy does as he is told. Wait, I interrupt. Really? Just like that, no questions. I grab more napkins from the dispenser. Of course, Jeanette says, motioning with the spoon to my grandmother, who follows it like baited hook. It's the devil. So because this was the devil, and that is more than reason enough, the boy opens his mouth. Are you sure? I insist. Because I think if it were me, I might resist, a little at least. Well, Jeanette taps her chin. Maybe a little, she concedes. But because no one is ever willingly dragged to hell, the terrible boy snaps his mouth shut again and yells at the man in the suit, No, I won't, and who the hell are you to make me? But the devil does not respond. The devil does not have to. He glows white, blue, black, the flickering of cold flames, and with a tisk of his tongue the boy's jaw drops, and he stands there, wide-mouthed. Then the man reaches inside. Wait. I have ripped the napkin with my pen. Into the boy's mouth. Yes. Why? The boy's jaws are locked in place, pried open with invisible jacks and cold, blunt claws. Then the man approaches, slowly. There is no rush, and he reaches inside into the young man's mouth like a plumber reaches into a clogged gutter, like magicians reach into hats, and just as slow, just as calmly, the man takes hold of the young man's tongue, digging his fingernails into it. I'm not sure about the fingernails, Jeanette says. Why not? Mi mamá, she crosses herself in memory of her dead mother, she never mentioned anything about fingernails. But it's the devil. Doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it seem right? Wouldn't he have long fingernails? Jeanette twists her mouth. Wants to give this to me, but this is a true story, she tells me. Of course, I nod emphatically. But tongues are slippery. That's true too, right? I wait for her to consider my point. Even if the nails aren't long, he must have them. And squeeze hard enough, they'll break the skin, right? And besides, how else are you going to get hold of a tongue? Well, she exhales. I guess that is true. She looks up at the ceiling, giving it one final go-over before nodding. Yes, all right. Fingernails, then. The man can smell the boy's breath as he pushes him against the wall. He presses one hand against the boy's forehead to keep the head in place while he digs sharp fingernail tips into the pink tongue, and he begins to pull. He yanks hard, once, twice, thrice, like he's trying to start a rusted lawnmower. Once, twice, thrice, until little membranes start to give like the white roots of sprawling weeds, and nerves begin to send screaming pulses up the young man's spine. The boy tries to scream, but it is a difficult thing to do with a man rhythmically tugging on his tongue. Once, twice, thrice, but he is in a trance. He does not yell. He does not resist. He does not move. He allows the rhythmic motion of the tall man's tugging. Once, thrice, thrice, again, repeat. It is as if the boy has already been tugged out of himself and is only able to watch the scene from a little distance with the sound turned all the way down. He can only hear the sound of a fly crashing against the window pane, lentils dripping from the wall, the fabric of the man's coat stretching around the seams, but then also the fizzing taste of rust in his mouth. The boy swallows blood, and it tastes to him like an antidote. Suddenly, he begins to come down back into himself, and he starts to squirm and struggle. He kicks the man in the ankle, kicks him in the shins. He reaches up, tries to scratch out the man's eyes, and for a moment he feels the man's grip loosen. Only a moment, because it is just the shifting of forces. The man swats the boy's hands away, kicks his legs out from under him. He grabs the half-torn tongue like a fistful of hair. But what about the mother? I look up at Jeanette. What about her? Jeanette wipes my grandmother's chin with a metal spoon. Where is she while all this is happening? Well, Jeanette motions with her head to a corner of the room. Over there. And I look as if I might actually see a woman standing there. What do you mean? I ask her. Over there. Well, what do you mean? Wouldn't she, I'm not sure how to phrase it, intervene? The boy can barely scream. He gags and gargles and chokes on his own blood. But this is enough for a mother. She feels the devil's hand as if it were inside her own mouth and around her own neck. So she shakes off whatever power has been holding her back, and she throws herself at the man in the suit. She wraps her arms around his neck like a noose and yells at her son, "Go, go, go!" Yes, Jeanette concedes. That sounds right. Patting my grandmother on the forearm. Mothers are very forgiving. Which reminds me of my younger sister, when she split her bottom lip against the metal corner of a full-force rusty jungle gym swing. Midway down, wood, metal, and meat. It was a lip like an open book, pages ripped apart. A vertical line made into two horizontal ones. Vertical line made into two horizontal ones, because I know these things. And an endless well of red in the middle. And I remember my mother pushing down crowds and kicking moving cars until she got my sister to the hospital. "Pare, maldito, es que no ve de paso." And I remember another day when my grandmother saved me from my mother and her leather shoe insert after I'd done something particularly egregious. "If you hit this child," she said to my mother, "I will pull down your pants and beat you right back." It is one of my favorite memories of her. A frail body even then, standing between the cannon and the fodder, before she even knew what I'd done. As Jeanette brushes my grandmother's hair behind her ear, I recall that time, also, from her wheelchair, that my grandmother tried to beat Jeanette, her dark-skinned nurse, with her cane, too. It is only a moment, a few seconds, no more. But a few seconds are enough for the young man to kick his way out from under the man in the suit and run to the door. He is going to leave the room. He is going to run outside, into the bushes, down the river, and out of town. He is going to disappear, and he is going to buy stationery in a corner shop in Madrid, in Buenos Aires, in Bogotá, and he is going to write his mother a letter from a far-off city where the devil doesn't visit. An apology in pink stationery with white flowers on the corner, like the ones on his mother's favorite china, the one he broke against the wall all those years back. That's what the boy, because really he's still only just a boy, tells himself between one moment and the next. But somewhere in the mesh of white nylon ligaments and red yarn nerves torn from him, he already knows that he will never leave this room again. He hears whispers the instant he places his hand on the doorknob. A cold, burning, solid sound, something mercurial, acidic, that flows and fills and then congeals between the spaces of his ear canals and the lock inside the door. He feels the sound like squirming pus, like swelling eggs in his inner ear, and he screams. He clutches his ears, and despite the crimson sound pulsing behind his eyes, he still tries to turn the knob. But of course, there is no use. He tries to pull, and then to push, and then he bangs his fist on the wood as if there is someone waiting for him on the other side. But since the knob won't turn, the boy finally does. The man stands perfectly still and perfectly composed in the middle of the room as a fly hits the glass one last time and collapses in the windowsill. There are no stains on the man's suit, no scrapes where he has been kicked, no prints where he has been punched, and no blood on his hands at all. So the boy begins to understand. This is not the devil of contracts and compromises. This is the devil of gavels and scales. His pockets are full of pulled teeth and plucked eyes, and what a mother is willing to forgive has no bearing on him whatsoever. He has tossed the boy's mother across the room, where she lays unconscious atop shards of broken china. The man does not take his eyes off of the boy. He seems immobile and frozen in place, like he's always been there, like the jungle, always gnawing at the edges of the cities of men. Only, of course, he must have moved. He must have, because he was there, just right there, and then here, now, with his hand around the boy's throat, tossing him to the ground, where he gasped for air. Then the man in the suit puts a foot down on the boy's neck and a hand inside his mouth, and he pulls out a tongue like a sword from a stone. Just like that, my handwriting has evolved into feral scratches while I try to catch up, and Jeanette gently wipes my grandmother's mouth with a clean napkin, calling her Mommy and Mama, looking at her with more tenderness than I have ever mustered for anything on this earth, and I wonder if Jeanette knows that my grandmother would have never allowed this before her mind began to slip. They never know their place, these people, she used to say, always trying to igualársele a uno, sit at the same table with you, as if they were anything like you, same as you, the gall. I feel a tightness in my chest. Yes, Jeanette says, that's it, what must have happened. I look up at her. Then what? Then what? Then the end. Jeanette pauses, tilts her head back, looking at the ceiling like people glance at dictionaries and tarot decks. History, my grandmother used to correct me. Not stories, Lina. History is what I tell you. He pulls, Jeanette clarifies, until the boy is dead. The boy is dead. Yes, of course, Lina. What did you think? And then he leaves. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you, Sonia. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. I actually was thinking, I have all of my questions in front of me, but based on what you two just read, I have a different question that I want to start with, and that is just, we have from Sonia this idea of listing, and we have present, we have past, we have these sort of neat compartments. We don't have, we talked earlier in our craft talk about the idea of not having necessarily a linear story. And we have, I'm not even sure, is that, I mean, you called it fantasy, right? So there's fantasy violence, but we have the devil, we have family, we have dementia, we have truth, we have hard truths. How is nonfiction all of these things? When you write it, how do you know what is allowed? I feel like my students ask me that very often, and what you both brought to the page, even just in this reading, feels so outside the assumed realm of what nonfiction can be. And that's what excites me about it, but I wonder if you could talk about that.
Is there an order? Like
you first.
Well, with Jeanette, I love her so much. With Jeanette, I'm always wondering like what she'll let me get away with, like how much the construction is. And I'm with the nonfiction book that I'm working on right now, I'm really kind of obsessed with that narrative, that storytelling. I think there might still be a reeling. We're reeling from. I want to know the facts about alternative facts. I think that's what I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. There was this article, I think in The Atlantic, perhaps, that blamed creative nonfiction for the acceptance and birth of the alternative fact. I hope I'm getting that right, but I think it's actually the potential antidote for it. Because it's like a chronic pain, isn't it? When you tell somebody, this doesn't hurt. The thing that you are perceiving is not. Then you stop being, we keep talking about authority, like these people know, these are the scientists. But when you address somebody and say like this thing that you feel, this grief that you feel, this devil that you met is not. And your perception is irrelevant. I think that is a worse thing. Like that just sort of like pushes things down, and they're always going to come back down. Have we learned nothing from repression? Mm-hmm. So I think like when I talk to Jeanette, and I think I know her pretty well now, and she tells me about all these devils and all these things, and her reality is just a little bit off from my reality. I understand what she's coming when she talks about demons, when she talks about her nephew's exorcism, I feel like I'm close to understanding what it is that she's talking about. I think we're talking about the same thing, and I was just talking to your students about hell, because these are the things I think about, and how heaven really does require quite a bit of faith, but hell doesn't. It's just right there. It's all the time. It's never so far that you can't grab it by the snout and the tail at the same time. And I think that the confrontation and allowing people to speak about that experience and finding where all that nonfiction joins, rather than saying this is the official and this is the only thing, might be a way to sort of counteract and validate the story. And so for me, that essay is a lot about negotiating truths, and does this make sense or does not make sense, and how we're constantly crafting stories for ourselves that make life a little bit easier. And we're all doing that, every single one of us. But there is a hierarchy of metaphors and magic that is and isn't, and this is for those outside, and this is the magic for us outside. So I don't remember your question, nor if I answered it. Can we?
Wait, I remember the question.
Okay, do you want to answer it?
I don't know, but I'll repeat the question, because I love the question, which is what is allowed.
Yeah.
I feel like a question like what is allowed always makes me want to say everything is allowed. Don't tell me what's allowed, or let's not talk about something being allowed or not allowed. So
Yeah.
I think that's true with nonfiction, that I mean, we are in a time and a place, for better or for worse, where the word reality does always have to have a possessive pronoun in front of it. Now, the way Lina said, my reality, her reality, your reality, whose reality, for better or for worse. But I think in this question of writing nonfiction, we were talking about this too a little bit over dinner, because I'm first a fiction writer, and by first I don't mean primarily, I mean like chronologically first. I was writing fiction, and now I'm writing nonfiction. I really feel that fiction writing on some level feels more true and truthful than nonfiction writing. I find nonfiction writing to be, because you have these things that are supposedly true or factual in this big lump of clay, and because you have to find a way to tell a story, you have to, in my form, it's very spare, it's these little vignettes, it's lists, you're really extracting just little bits of this thing called reality or truth or nonfiction. It's so not really nonfiction. It's so storytelling. There's so much in a way, there's so much more storytelling that goes on in nonfiction for me that feels almost like I have to grapple with the question of what's true and what's not true more than I do when I'm writing fiction. When I'm writing fiction, there's something clearer almost to me about what is the truth that I'm trying to get at through these characters, through this story, through this drama. So what's allowed in nonfiction, it just feels like everything and anything, really.
I heard someone say writing nonfiction must be so easy because you know what happened. You know what happens next when you're writing. I'm like, I don't know what's happening now. And especially when you're, I think nonfiction is palm reading backwards, right? Like you look at the scars that you have, and then you try to sort out how exactly they got there. And I think nonfiction is quite hard. but I think what you were talking about, that I'm like perception, like that's the word for it, right? I think I do have a deep belief in facts. I love gravity, not when I'm falling, but in general, and like in the spinning of the earth part of thing. But the moment we start to communicate anything, even the purest fact, we leave our thumbprints on its shell. Like that's perception. So I don't think, to me, sort of the cure or the antidote to it, like there's in translation we always talk about the invisibility of the translator, because that's what they say. Like a good translator is like a window pane. You don't notice, it's the light just comes through, which is ridiculous. Like try translating with somebody else's voice, see where that puts you. But the antidote to invisibility, which is a lie, the translator is present constantly, and you're always hearing the translator's voice. is transparency. It's for me to tell you, my perception is here. This is it. Instead of just saying these alternate realities and alternate facts, like this is my perception of, and this is the transmission, and there's always loss in transmission. And maybe if we were just to accept the continuous loss of it, it might be a better way to talk about truth and reality.
Well, and I think in nonfiction we focus, or certainly students coming to it, right, focus on the idea of fact or get nervous about the idea of fact, but I think so much of essay is about exactly that, my story. And I think it is storytelling in the best way. And it's feeling in the dark for the truth as opposed to fact, and or figuring out what is fact. And I think part of that is being identified, the trickiness is being identified in opposition to fiction, right? So nonfiction. So we think it's, if fiction, which is usually the first type of story we're all exposed to as children, and that's a story, those are fun, right? Fiction is fun, then nonfiction by definition is not fun. And I think that it feels like it needs to be very serious. And what I love in the way that both of you attempt to tell, to get closer to something, is through these routes that are not typical and not expected. And so through, and I think in many of the pieces in here, so we have poets, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, songwriters, playwrights, but we wanted them to tell their stories about home through nonfiction, and yet everybody did that in such a different way. There was no single avenue. And I think that's the beauty when it is perception and striving to tell my story, which then opens up, you at dinner said something really lovely about that idea. If a human is talking about an experience they had, I think you used the example, like, my mother passed away, and our human reaction is to say, oh, well, I had this experience too, my uncle passed away, and that back and forth on the page, I think the personal allows space for the reader on the page, and it's exciting to me and I hope for students who aren't quite sure of what nonfiction is, to see that it can be anything. I think that it is exciting that you can, as long as you're being honest about it to your reader, that it can involve almost anything.
I mean, the sort of the counter argument to that is, what are the ethics, right? So there was the controversy with James Fry, A Million Little Pieces.
Yeah, is
right?
that
He
still in
wrote
the zeitgeist? Because I tried to talk to my students about it the other day, and they're like, what? Oprah? You mean Ellen?
Right.
So,
right. How many people know the James Fry A Million Little Pieces?
Two.
thing? Yeah.
Oh, no.
It's someone who
There's
wrote
more
a memoir, but later it was learned that he fabricated some things. And there's an essayist named John D'Agata who also has sort of taken the side of permissibility when it comes to nonfiction. Did it really happen this way? It sort of happened this way, but I'm telling the story, and I defend my right to sort of craft the story that way. And the spectrum is wide, and now that we're in a time where the people that were supposedly telling us the truth, did I say shithole? Maybe I didn't say shithole. I didn't say shithole. He says I didn't. She said it. Whatever. But in a way, the principle's the same, which is, for me, I feel like, at least on the art side of it, the answer isn't to legislate it, right? The answer isn't to make rules about you can or you can't do this. Or in fiction, some of the you can and can't is around cultural appropriation. If you're male, you can't write female protagonists. If you're white, you can't write protagonists of color, something like that. All that kind of rulemaking I don't think is particularly useful. I think in both of these arenas, what it does is just makes us as citizens and as readers have to be more active, right? We're being asked to engage and ask the question about truth with a small t, truth with a capital T, my reality, your reality, and I think that's a good thing. It's exhausting, but I think ultimately that's what I'm on the side of that, I guess I would say.
I keep thinking about, like, if we were to define anything else by these parameters, like, this is blue, this is mauve, and this is not blue or mauve. But it can have tiny traces of it. Like, that's nonfiction. I do, I tell my students, you're going to have to figure this out for yourself. And I tell them the rules that I have come up with for myself. And I think the worst lies come from vanity. And I think that's the lie that I want to be most afraid of. I want to be pretty honest about the dishonesty like that. Like, you know exactly what I'm doing. I'm putting this together because it's very hard. I hear a lot of stories from a lot of people. A man told me recently how his son misplaced his soul and the things they did to get it back. And if you tell a story about like how you lost your keys, you're like, I lost my keys and then I found my keys. To craft that into a story, I have to go like, where do you live? How many windows are there? Like, what's your mother's name? Like, I need to know all of these things that are sometimes impossible for me to know. Like, does the devil wear a hat? And I'm just constantly putting these things together. But I feel like that's the worst lies are, for example, if I were, writing about my drug addiction, I am recovering, is like, and then I punched the cop in the face, and I am such like that's a lie made out of vanity, right? So for me, like, these are the hard lines. If I'm ever like writing myself like too well, then I'm like, I'm not being honest. Kind of a terrible individual. So I sort of curtail that and try to be more brutal, more honest.
I think subjectivity is important. I have the sort of backstory being the editor of this book because so many of these essays talk about and touch on the ideas of things that feel very relevant and very current to us right now. Yet we put the call out for these essays back before Trump was our president. The essays went out, the call for the essays went out when editors were responding saying, do you really need a book of women-only essays when you're about to have a woman in the House, in the White House? And actually, those were female editors who asked those questions, and it was sort of, don't you have enough space? And now this was, so putting this book together was pre-DACA, pre-Me Too, pre all of this, where that was not before they existed, obviously, but before they were topics of conversation of everyday cultural consciousness for people in this room, and on the cover of every magazine.
But it makes perfect sense. I mean, for the last however many presidents who have been male, there have been no anthologies of male writers. So it's only fair, right? I'm with you.
Yeah, exactly. No, space?
Yeah, too much.
Don't you have a home as your space?
Is it like a woman spreading thing going like, is that what they were trying to counter?
Yeah, and
it's very reasonable.
What Margot, my co-editor, and I found amazing is that once the marches started happening and the pink hats and all of these, we realized everything that has broken across post-Trump in our society, everything that seems to have emerged very loudly was present in these essays before he even became our president. And I think, or I wonder if part of that isn't just the subjectivity of a woman and home, and how those two things seem so simple in the same way that nonfiction can be fact, right? So that the idea that there's a woman and there's a home, and those are two things, and yet home is not really definable because it can mean a million different things depending on your perception. Woman is not definable. That can mean a million different things depending on your identity and your perception. But these two things that in our society feel so solid and knowable, and yet are not. And so I wondered if you, when you were writing your essays, if you thought about the politics, and Lena, actually, maybe you can finish the story of how I approached you, because in our call for the essays, we just said, write about home. And yet, what we got were these incredibly intellectually rigorous challenges to the idea of a woman and a home.
You want me to tell a story now? Is that what that was?
Well, I'm thinking, I guess I'm asking what...
Do you remember, so here's what happened. It involves some cannibalism, so like bear with me, just a tiny bit. So
I'm
I
so
was.
glad she gives us trigger warnings.
Yes. I don't know. Some people. So the last time I read this essay, I never read the same essay twice, but I was like, I bet you didn't know that there was another one.
No.
Do you feel like you've dodged a bullet? Is that?
No, I want to read the whole thing.
Yeah. So what was I going to say? Oh, right. So I read this recently in Charlottesville, which is another place now, and there was a woman sitting in the front row, and she made the most wonderful sound when I got to the ripping of the tongue. It was excruciating. I couldn't keep going. I had to pause, going like, did anybody else hear? She was like, oh, and I forgot that I should have like it. So now I do. So here's it. So I was living in China after no one hired me in the U.S. and I get an email from Patrick Madden. He teaches at BYU. He was my undergrad mentor, and I get an email from him going like, "Hey, Lena, do you want to write an essay for me? Like, you have 2 weeks. I want to put it in an anthology." So someone had dropped out of his anthology, and I was on call, and I have insomnia, so he thought, like, Lena will write something very quickly, and I did. And I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. I sent in an essay about this profound desire that I had. Like, I worked for the hospital for a whole summer dissecting placentas, because you don't need to know anything. They'll just give you that job. Go ask. And I don't ask. Don't tell them I sent you. But I was dissecting placentas, and I was just like, I went and I got them. Sometimes they were still warm, and then I went and I dissected them. And in retrospect, it might have something to do with the fact that I was also selling my plasma on a semi-daily basis. But all I wanted to do was eat it. Like, I saw that red. I can see some of the faces. You see the faces over there? I saw it was this red. It was the reddest red I've ever seen. And it was just like, I felt a hunger, not like if I tell you banana pudding is delicious, like you'll feel the hunger here in your tongue. Like, you'll salivate because you have a memory of this. But I recognized it, and I felt it in the pit of my stomach. I'm like, this has nutrients. Like, I knew it. I apologize. I'm gonna stop. I'm seeing a lot of really horrified faces. This is my truth. So I wrote an essay for another anthology called After Montaigne, because Montaigne has an essay called Of Cannibals, and I thought, I know what to do. And I wrote this essay, and because I was the last one, and because apparently it was one of the most horrifying essays Patrick Madden had ever seen, he asked me to be on the panel for it. I was sitting next to Philip Lope, who's a very respectable older gentleman, like godfather of the personal essay, and he loved it. He loved it. He was like, yeah, cannibalism, placenta, not enough in the genre. And not only did he wrote me a lot of recommendation after that. We've never spoken since. He's like, she's a promising young writer. He blurbed me because of that. And as I was walking away, this lovely young lady came up to me from behind going like, do you write about home? And I thought she meant placentas as our original homes. I had legitimately thought that's what you meant. And I thought, do you remember what I said? I said almost exclusively. And then she gave me a flyer, and I thought, this is crazy, and someone's trolling me. This is not real. I had to go home, and I spent 4 hours researching you to find out if you were a real person. And she was! And that's why I'm here now. That's how I got to this place, which do you know what the lesson of that story is? Mm-mm. You were saying it as if I know. I'm asking you legitimately because I lived through that. I have no idea. I feel like there's a lesson at the end of it, but I can't tell what it is. What was the original question? That's what I can't remember. I don't pay attention.
I think I've forgotten that too.
The question, you told me to tell them how we met. We met because I wanted to eat a placenta.
That's something about the politics.
Yeah.
Something about the politics.
So wait, when you got
the question,
when you got the call asking you to write about
that was not what you asked me. She said she asked me to tell the story of how we met. Right?
I thought the story was going to go somewhere else.
Okay, never mind. I just told the story. The politics of it.
Did you know when you saw the word home, because the call was simply write about home?
I didn't know, not at all. I come from a country at war. We just signed a peace treaty with one of the largest guerrillas, which people go it's great to have a country at peace. And I'm like, yeah, except for the ELN, which is the second largest guerrilla. Because we have 8 or more depending on the area. There is no way for me to think about home without the politics. Politics is just the plural word for conflict, right? And we're all living in constant conflict, and the plural conflict we call politics. So there is always conflict at home, and you can read politics into it, yes or no, but at the end of the day, if you ask me to write about something that I love, I'm going to have conflicting emotions about it, because that's what it is, right? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess story is, you can't have story without conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm going to go a little different direction, but sort of answer the
You
question.
don't have any experiences with placenta. You don't want to dwell in this.
We
We all have experiences with placenta.
Right. I want the essay about our original home. The womb essay is what I want. That would be a little bit fantasy, but anything goes. It's allowed. Politics. So you asked a question at a different event we did about, was it you? No, you. Someone asked you this question, so you asked us question about some of these platitudes about home, right? Home is where the heart is. What were some of the other ones? Like
Home Sweet Home.
And how do we feel about those kinds of expressions in relation to writing about home? And of course, I thought of an answer after the event because I couldn't think of one at the time. So the one that was thinking about or am thinking about in relation to my essay in this is A Woman's Place is in the Home, which for me has become a really interesting touchstone because, my mother was relegated to the home in a way that was not good for her. There was a life unlived and lots of unhappy things for her in that sense. But it's interesting to kind of come full circle and to owe the generation before me and before that of feminists who've kind of moved us forward, that as a writer, writing this thing and getting the email from Kelly, do you want to write this essay? I mean, all I want is to be home all the time, because as a writer, that's freedom for me. I can get out of the day job, and I can just be at home, then I can be doing what I want to do. Right. I mean, that's ultimate independence for me, is to be able to be home. So, and in this little space, that's all I actually really want, is to be confined. It's like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the yellow wallpaper.
Right.
I want to be confined in this little room to do my work. And that's independence and freedom for me. So it's interesting that expression actually politically has become kind of like, let's bring that back or something.
I remember when you asked this question, and I gave some sort of different answer, but you only walk away with the answer you didn't give. You don't remember the thing you actually said. But I remember because a former Chinese student of mine went to that reading, and the word, you never go home in Chinese. You only return home. The only verb that you use for home is return. So you can choose somewhere else, but we hui jiao, always. So I think that's, you can't talk about home without romanticizing the past and without the good old days. Like, that's the thing that you're constantly going for, right? Every time that anybody talks about, like, things used to be better, when specifically? It's primarily when we were children and things were simpler, right? Like, when we didn't have a full understanding of whatever it is. And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think I'm not talking down to, like, you don't remember whatever, but there was a simplicity of existence. And we have complicated ourselves in these complications. So it's, that's home. Home is back. That's what it is. You have to return to whatever it is. And that, I think, especially like reading the anthology, so much diversity. I think you did a great job. Do you get tired of like the people telling you, did you do a good, when you were going about like how the anthology like predicted all of this, I'm like, is this leading up to I'm a prophet now?
That would be a terrible, to be a Cassandra in that way would be a terrible, terrible.
See, I was going on like, you didn't warn us! You just came up with an anthology. People will know. So.
Although initially our pitch was, we can sell it in Urban Outfitters and it'll be very nostalgic.
Did you really?
Home and sweet. When Margot and I first talked about it, we thought, home, it'll be...
Williams-Sonoma.
Yeah, exactly. And then that was before we wrote our own essays and realized, you're right, conflict, politics. These are things that you can't have story without. I think we're going to open it up to questions. While that mic is coming up, I just have one quick question I'm going to steal from my students that they didn't get to ask earlier. So I remember the first reading I ever went to was Terry Tempest Williams' when I was at Vassar College. I was a sophomore, and it blew me away, or maybe a freshman, no, sophomore, and it really blew me away. And what's amazing, what I realized in class the other day, was that she's in this anthology. So that one of the reasons that I am a writer today is part of this book. And I wondered, when you were students, undergrads, obviously not already committed writing grad students, did you have any idea that this was the trajectory you wanted to be on?
No.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't a reader as a child. I liked climbing trees and getting concussions. That was my hobby. And I did really like writing, and I was a good writer in Spanish once upon a time, but right now I only write like legal things, and I don't think I could get back to it. But I did have a discussion with my parents when I was like really considering this. When I came out as a writer to my father, and his only response was like, "At least you're not a poet." We had a conversation. He's like, "Well, there are great universities in Mexico," and we had this conversation of like, should I go to Mexico? Should I be applying for that sort of thing? And I ended up sort of deciding to write in English to do this type of work. Mm-hmm. I did not have a path to become a translator, but I knew that I wanted to talk to people about things that they might have never heard of, because it was inaccessible because of a different language. But then once I arrived at college, I went in an entirely different path. I took computer programming, animation. Animation is where I thought that I was going to end up, because it's really great, but also just exhausting. And then I tore up my knee. I have my ACL, my MCL, my meniscus, and my cartilage. And I was bedridden and on drugs, and I applied to grad school. That is legitimately how I ended up.
Because what else is there to do when you're
I couldn't move. I had this huge part, so break your legs.
It's good advice, kids.
Yeah. Also, no. Yes and no. I do have an answer to this question. I don't often have an answer to the question of who's your favorite writer, or that's always such a hard question. But I do have this moment in college when I read something and I was like, oh, I gotta do that. I gotta try to do that. And that was a writer named Annie Dillard, who wrote a book called A Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And when I read that, I just thought, what the hell is that? And I have to try to. But the no is that I just had no framework at all for what a writer was or how to be one. So very kind of typical immigrant family, pre-professional. You have to be stable. You have to get your education and then become like a lawyer or a doctor or something. So I didn't know any actual people who were artists in any way. So it took me a long time. So yes, in the sense that it was kind of there in some way, but the actual possibility was just not even kind of on the screen. So
does this feel like coming full circle? Because it's notably a nonfiction book that started you off on this path.
Yeah.
And then you went into a novel and you came back.
Absolutely.
It was all leading up to this particular moment.
Right.
Cassandra knew about all along.
Thanks.
I'm still working at being as good as Annie Dillard. But,
Yes.
Oh God, no, I have no aspirations there. No, I just aim to talk about my mom to strangers.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Thanks.
First of all, thank you so much for an informative and fun evening. I mean, I'm curious, any of the writers, this anthology you have is about home and it's about personal. Do you feel any constraints when you're writing, composing for publishing from particularly family members, or and how you deal with that?
Constraints. Don't leave the microphone just yet. I have questions about your question. Do you mean do we is it difficult to write about people we know? Do we say oh we can't, or do people ask us not to write about them? Is that what you mean?
Well, your conflict. If you have a conflict that a family member might not appreciate you writing this, that type of thing.
Do you want to take this?
Sure. We were just talking about this before. It's hard. It's tricky. Because I'm newish to writing very personal nonfiction, it's a live question for me. But My sense is that the best writing doesn't hold back. So when I'm writing, I'm very aware of how, I'm aware and then ignore how aware I am of how dangerous it feels to be writing whatever I'm writing, whether it's revealing something about myself or somebody close to me, but I don't censor it at all when I'm writing. And then I think there are decisions to be made on the other end of the actual, having written the thing and feeling like it's as true and as real and as vulnerable and as uncensored as possible. My sense about how I will make those decisions or how those decisions get made, I don't know. I think you were talking about kind of hard lines and sort of you have your own kind of internal ethics about it, and I'm choosing to hope to trust that I kind of in my relationships that I have a good censor, not censor, SENSOR, for where those lines are and where the kind of the respect and the love are about that. But I think as writers we're always choosing about the writer and the human, and we were talking about, the people in your life right now that you're in relationship with. Are you kind of thinking to yourself, this is going to go in an essay? When you're, and yeah, I mean, frankly, yes, that's part of what it is to be a writer, I think. So it's always there.
I'm so wildly lucky. I have these phenomenally, pathologically supportive parents. And now people come to me and tell me stories. Like, people know, like, I'll go back home or I'll go back, like, my parents are living in Ecuador right now, and I went to church with my mother, and then this woman came up to me and says, like, oh, Vilma tells me that you want to hear about how I used to be a witch, but now I found Jesus. And I said, yes, I do want to know that. And I was so busy meeting so many people that my mother had pre-selected for me to talk to, that I couldn't get to her. Like, she's a yerbatera, and she said this, she like looked into my eyes and was like, there are herbs to cure everything, but also herbs to tear it down. And I'm like, yeah, it's called poison. I am aware of this, tell me more. It was delightful. And I have to call her now. Now we're WhatsApp friends. So do you know what WhatsApp is? Yeah, everyone in the world but the US knows what WhatsApp is. I don't. I just have this really, I think it helps a lot that people don't think that I don't believe I do anything of importance. So when
Right.
I'm like, I write in a different language in a state that no one has ever heard of, right? Like, is it New York? No. Is it Los Angeles? No. Is it in the US? Are you sure? This is a US adjacent. So that's very, very helpful. But I think, like, to answer your question legitimately without making light is, I always ask for permission. I would never write anything that somebody wouldn't, like, ask me not to write about. My grandfather told me this phenomenal story about how his brother Jaime, after whom my father is named, destroyed his knee. And I thought, okay, I can do a parallel here, because the doctors wanted to amputate my aunt's leg just at the same time, and he tore up his knee jumping out of a train, and I had just destroyed my own knee. And I'm like, this is the trend. This is how we deal with a loss that is so personal that you can't ever, like, fully mourn, right? Like, here's a part of me that's gone. And he told me one detail that I thought was excruciating and beautiful and heartbreaking. He said, this is the one thing you can't write about. And I didn't. I can spend time with anybody in the world at any point in time throughout the week, but I have to spend time with me, and I don't want to spend time with that person who would disregard, the only thing my grandfather ever asked me for.
A couple of things that have surprised me about this question too, because if you assume, for instance, that your family members will be upset or something, so two things. As a fiction writer, I'm surprised to find that there are certain family members that even if the character is not based on them, they will assume it is based on them no matter what. So it's kind of no win in that sense. But also fiction or nonfiction, it's surprising that there are certain family members. I mean, there's a real ambivalence about it, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, how dare you, and this is kind of cultural, like, how dare you put family business on the street? But on the other hand, if you omit it, they feel insulted. Why wasn't I in it? So it's kind of no win, and that's kind of liberating. Like, then just write the thing, and then.
Yeah, and I would also say, in my experience, having a few essays out early in my career, realizing the sentence that I worried about was never the sentence that people actually got upset about. It was always, you really think my hair is brown? And so you can't anticipate what someone is actually going to be upset about. And so it's an impossible place to write from or to write toward, I think.
Sure. It's a great question.
We probably have time for one more. If anyone has one.
Was her hair brown? Was that the discovery that you're colorblind? Was that the thing you learned about yourself in nonfiction?
No, but I'm thinking of Joseph Mitchell's Maisie, where he describes her as a yellow-haired. And there are ways that you can really make somebody angry. Or the difference between a vintage car and a junk car.
I put a lot of stock in people's laziness. So a thing that I will frequently do about another person that I write about is I'll send her the whole essay and go like, you're in it. Tell me if you don't want this published. Tell me where. Tell me what to change. She never reads it. She just doesn't read it. It's too long. So she'll like feel guilty eventually and write me back and go, yeah, it's fine. She won't read it. It's too much. Yeah. So at that point, it's on you.
Yeah. But you're right that ultimately, as the writer, you have to live with yourself and the consequences of telling the truth. So no last questions? Or, Andrea, I see you almost going up. Are you? Okay. All right. Well, we will be at the back table for a little while and happy to sign books and answer more questions. Thank you so much for your attention and being here with us tonight. And thank you, everybody, the Cultural Center and Hofstra English and our wonderful Lina and Sonia. This is the place.
And Kelly.